We are so thrilled that you are making your way in. It is good to see some familiar faces and some new faces as we explore making space neurodiversity in the church. Our time together today has been supported by Presbyterian Sharing. Spencer Edwards, if you want to give a wave, Spence. He is my colleague working on Christian education and youth programming. And the youth program we are talking of is our youth, young adult, and youth leader event that is happening again with the United Church of Canada next summer. And all of the details are coming very soon. So you can patiently or impatiently await that wonderful news about what is coming. But today we are talking about making space and neurodiversity in the church. So Spencer, can you talk to us about why this matters for the church?
Absolutely. This may be a familiar passage to many of you. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. There is so much diversity in the world God's created. As Christians, it's our joy and our practice to love the diversity of God's creation tangibly. After all, we can't know God without knowing one another. Paul describes how we ought to relate to one another in 1 Corinthians 12, reminding us that Christ's body is made up of different parts, all equal in value. Every one of us is a member of Christ's body, and we are not complete if we are missing even a single part. It is our work as a church to genuinely welcome all of God's children into relationship with one another and with God. And welcome doesn't just mean words, it means designing our spaces and training ourselves to embrace people and behaviors we don't always understand so that we can love them well. After all, it is only through loving others in God's creation that we can practice loving God.
So neurodiversity, what is it? It is a psychological and neurobiological reveal extensive variety in human behavior and neurology. Traditional views categorize less common behaviors as atypical and common behaviors as normal, but this is not the case. Disability rights activists championed a positive strengths-based approach. This new perspective is called neurodiversity, focusing on strengths rather than disabilities. And this approach assumes competence and the capabilities and the various God-given gifts that people have. Neurodiversity refers to individuals whose brains differ from what is considered neurotypical. Folks like Spencer and myself who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are neurodiverse folks.
Sorry, what was that you just said?
Come on, Spencer. I know you can focus in for just this hour. You should see when the two of us are collaborating behind closed doors. It is a mishmash of interrupting and excitement. Common neurodivergent conditions include autism, ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, and Down syndrome. Emotional and behavioral challenges such as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, depression, and anxiety can also be forms of neurodivergence. Neurodivergence may arise later in life due to aging, brain injuries, or other life events. And like Spencer and myself, who found out and were diagnosed with ADHD later in life, many remain undiagnosed which can cause them unnecessary frustration and suffering. Neurodivergent individuals may or may not identify as having a disability, and we need to respect and honor how they see themselves and how they need and want to be accommodated. Neurodiversity brings strengths such as creativity, attention to detail, sensitivity, compassion, and vision. Many environments and social norms are not designed with neurodivergent people in mind. And this mismatch can lead to feelings of exclusion and being unwelcome in neurotypical spaces. And here we have numbers of 90% of disabilities are invisible, and much of the neurodiverse community are invisible disabilities. And so we have a number of neurodiverse people in our churches. They may not know that they are neurodiverse. We may not know that they are neurodiverse, but they are a beautiful part of the body of Christ. And we need to be honoring them and their gifts and their place within our faith communities.
So the church is no different from the outside world. Statistically speaking, 1 in 5 of our congregants is likely neurodivergent. Like most institutions, or like many institutions, most churches do not yet have the knowledge or resources to accept people naturally and spontaneously into their community. We may say that we welcome the stranger, but do we welcome people who are different to lead worship? Do we invite them into our homes? After worship, do we ask them to join committees and participate in making decisions for the whole church body? Neurodivergent people bring amazing gifts into the body, perspectives that neurotypical people cannot access, and championship they cannot know without the presence of neurodivergent people. And Jess was had mentioned earlier that the neurodiverse language is about strengths. Like all of us, whether neurodivergent or neurotypical, we all have strengths and then things that we struggle with. This graphic from a United Kingdom organization called Genius Within, which has fabulous, fabulous resources. A lot of research we did came from them. And this just shows some of the strengths that are commonly associated with various neurodiverse conditions. And this will make all this available, links to the website and some of the notes and the presentation itself if you want it later. But this is, again, listing some common neurotypes and then some of the things that may, positive things that may come with them that are strengths. With dyspraxia, there are like verbal skills and empathy. Autism brings concentration and fine detail processing, often incredible memory. Of course, these are, broad brush. And when it comes to neurodiversity, it's right in the name. People are going to be really diverse. I think that if you've met one person with Tourette syndrome, you've met one person with Tourette syndrome. There's, a lot of these exist on a spectrum, and often they may have like they call them comorbid conditions, but I hate that term because it sounds negative. But a person may have one or more neurotypes that makes up who they are. So again, it's important to understand people as individuals, but these are some like broad brush gifts that we may find in our communities. Um, in the 21st century, we know so much more about how neurodivergent folks think and what helps them participate fully in community. So it's imperative that we take the time to learn and listen to those in our community, design better ways to do ministry, to be the church with one another. Um, and because human behavior and needs fall on a spectrum, neurodiversity is not all or nothing. All the changes that we make to welcome explicitly neurodivergent folks into our spaces will make church more accessible for everyone. So maybe having the ability to step away from worship if it's too loud for someone on the autism spectrum could also just be appreciated by someone with like a hearing issue, or I have friends that are strong introverts that would also maybe appreciate an opportunity to step away. So hopefully, whatever we do for neurodiverse folks also blesses others as well.
And so let's hear some of the neurodivergent voices on their experience with church. Like any community within our faith communities, it doesn't help us to talk about people if they don't have their voice heard and they don't have a spot at the table. So every neurodivergent person is different, as Spence has said, and you will hear many times over. For some, church is a positive experience with their neurodivergent, enhancing their engagement and their connection with the service, with our times of worship. And some neurodivergent people navigate church without any difficulty. But there are others that have needs that aren't met by standard church services. And here are some comments from folks about their church experience. One girl with autism describes church as hard. The music is so loud. This is like my son currently, who is ADHD, autistic with ADHD, and he hasn't been to church in a while, not because our faith community isn't wonderful. It is because he's a bit of a homebody right now, and he's feeling a little more sensitive. And when I'm getting ready to go to church, and I will say, "Are you going to come to church? It's time for church." He will say, "No, no, no crowds, no crowds." And I want to remind him that we go to a country Presbyterian church, so there typically aren't crowds there, but he knows that there will be the music, and people are very chatty and excited during coffee hour. And so for him right now, being in the church building isn't the place for him. So this really resonates for my neurodiverse household right now. And like him, many neurodivergent people have highly sensitive sensory systems that don't filter input well. You will see a lot of autistic folks wearing noise canceling headphones or covering their ears. And church environments can be overwhelming due to loud music, the bright lights, perhaps their strong sense of communion or incense, or uncomfortable textures. Nobody typically talks about pews and, oh boy, I would like to install pews for all the seats in my house. And sitting comfortably, if you perhaps are ADHD and you have a great need to move your body and some more novelty, that can be difficult. And sensory input is often experienced more intensely. If something is loud, it is louder. If something's bright, it's brighter. If it's sharp, it's sharper. And if it's rough, it is rougher. And this constant sensory overload can be deeply exhausting for neurodivergent individuals. A woman with ADHD says, my brain is a radio and I just can't tune into the station I want. I can hear the sermon through the crackling static, but other stations burst through and block me from hearing clearly enough to understand. It can be really draining to force yourself to focus at church. Another girl with autism finds coffee hour particularly difficult. She says people walk all different ways in the room, which makes me anxious. Some experience social anxiety. The no crowds that I'm hearing in my house could be an element of social anxiety that causes distress. And given that there are social codes and expectations embedded in our church cultures, attending can be very overwhelming. Some neurodivergent people read, write, and communicate or move differently from the majority. And if this is not accommodated in church, they can experience great difficulty and feel excluded. If we think about times in church when a small child that has decided to stay with their parents instead of perhaps going to some children's programming, and they're shuffling in their seat and maybe making a few noises here or there, or a baby stays with a parent and cries because of any number of reasons that baby needs to communicate. We know there are folks that are turning and looking, or there's frustration that people aren't quiet in the pews nodding their heads. And it's very difficult to be the one on the receiving end of those well-meaning looks, just wondering what's going on. But making space for people to be the person they were knit together to be will ease that. In order to cope with these difficulties, some people regulate, and often many really need to regulate to be able to be a part of the world. Or they may need to calm themselves or focus their attention by moving. Maybe they're rocking, they're spinning, they're flapping, they're fidgeting, for example. A few Sundays ago, I was sitting at the end of my pew and I found myself really rubbing and using the beautiful carving in the end of the pew as a way for me to focus on the sermon. So my hand was busy, so my brain could do the work of listening and comprehending and reflecting alongside my minister. And as I said before, many churches expect people to sit still, but preventing these movements can hinder a person's self-regulation and cause them to feel overwhelmed during or after the service. And those feelings and that dysregulation can have impacts on the rest of one's day. If there isn't an opportunity to regulate oneself, that ripples through, because that sense of dysregulation and feeling off within yourself won't necessarily end once you leave the sanctuary after church and get yourself into a more comfortable place. And it may not allow someone to come back into that worshiping space because of how they felt so out of sync when they were last there. And so, speaking of regulation, there are a number of pieces to the neurodiverse brain. And neurotypical folks have all of these functions and skills and ways of thinking and being as well. But for a neurodiverse brain, there is more attention needed. And so when we think of emotional regulation, like we just talked about, finding ways when things are difficult, but also emotional regulation is helping oneself have a solid baseline. This morning I took my son to speech therapy, and we spent the beginning of the session with him jumping on a trampoline and listening to a song from the phonics program he's using at school. And because we took those 7 to 10 minutes and allowed him that space, he had a fabulous speech session and did so well because we did not try to rush him through getting himself ready. If you think about a presentation, say you have a webinar coming up, you need to get that prepared. And by focusing on a neurodiverse person's emotional regulation, I'm able to function so much healthier and to enter into situations if I have taken time to care for self. Cognitive function. These are the mental abilities that include attention, memory, learning, and reasoning. We talk about executive function. Mental skills like organization, problem solving, flexible thinking, and self-control. We take a lot of this for granted when we think of neurotypical folks, but some of these places need extra attention for our neurodiverse siblings in Christ. Emotional regulation. That is our ability to exert control over our emotions and to be very aware of our emotional state. Language and reading, the ability to read, the comprehension, and the ability to interpret written language and text. And I think this piece really also wraps into the listening piece as we offer the message, the sermon, the reflection during worship. Motor skills. Sometimes the fine motor skills can be difficult, and that accuracy or control are not as possible for folks. The physical sensitivity we were talking about, sensitivity to light, sound, touch, or smell. And it could be, some folks are sensory seekers where they want things to be really loud, or they want to move their bodies all the time, or they really love soft things, so they always have a particular stuffy that they keep with them, so they have that input. And we have the social skills. Sometimes that is a struggle, the ability to communicate with others using verbal and nonverbal cues. So as we talk about making space for people, having these pieces of people in mind as we adapt and accommodate and work to make our welcome for all truly for all.
Yeah. And in our research, we encountered this video from a young man in the United Kingdom. And it's just a 3-minute video, but we thought he was very articulate in describing what he has needed and how congregations can welcome neurodiverse folks.
Hi, I'm James. I'm the youth president for this year, and welcome to my church in Clifton. And today I'm going to be taking you through what neurodiversity is and how churches can help people like me. I am a person who lives with multiple neurodiverse conditions, ADHD, autistic traits, and dyscalculia. Over my lifetime, I've had multiple problems. In mathematics, I can add and subtract reasonably fine, but ask me to divide or times, and I'm of no use to anyone. In social situations, I am unable to read emotions or the meanings behind stuff. And there have also been positives, however. I've been found to be creative, a good problem solver, and fantastic at literacy skills. Before we begin, it's important to explain what we mean by neurodiversity. Examples of neurodiverse conditions are attention deficit hyperactive disorder, autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, and Tourette's. There are multiple things churches can do to help people like me. These are: understand that our conditions affect us both negatively and positively in our everyday life, our home life, our work life, and our church life, and accept us for who we are. And sometimes our conditions need a little help along the way to be able to do some tasks. So if you could put out equipment without us having to ask, such as acetate overlays for dyslexia, or doing shorter sermons or interactive sermons even, it would do a lot to help us to interact on a daily basis. Statistics show that people with neurodiverse conditions are more likely to be the victim of bullying, and what we need is a space for us to escape to, and to be able to heal and rebuild. At the end of the day, our conditions affect us all slightly differently, and we've spent our lifetimes building up coping mechanisms to be able to live with our conditions, and to the best people who know how to support us is us. So don't be frightened to ask us for help. These sorts of practices help us, and they also help you. Helps us by creating an inclusive space where differences are celebrated and alterations are seen as a natural way of life. And helps you because we will be equipped to interact more and give a fresh insight into the life of the church. Thank you for listening today, and we hope you found this information helpful, and it will definitely help people like me.
There we go. That's better. Jess, did you want to stop and see if people had any questions or reflections, or would people prefer to move on to some of the sort of resources and ideas section?
If anyone has something, feel free to raise your hand or unmute, and we can hear some thoughts or ideas that you currently have.
The chat is also open for people that would like to submit something in the chat, and we can read it out loud.
Which, speaking of making space, having the chat open for folks, there are many who find communicating through the written word, the typed word, or images to be the way they can communicate and use their voice. There are many folks with autism that have AAC devices, which are augmented. What's the other word, Spencer? What's the other A word? I don't remember it. Augmented and adapted communication. So there are many programs for iPads or tablets that have pictures and symbols that individuals can use to form sentences and to communicate, because getting the words from one's mind translated through their mouth verbally can be incredibly difficult. And Laura, that is a really helpful response you had. I experienced that video was very loud and busy compared to the rest of the webinar so far. Had to adjust the volume. It felt like an assault.
Yeah, sorry for that abrupt change.
Yes. And those are pieces that, had we spent more time and gone through the entire PowerPoint presentation, we would have noted that. And so that pre-planning and thinking and intentionality in everything we do is really important and part of making space as we welcome neurodiverse people. No, Laura, that was an excellent response to your experience. I just let it blare at me. So that shows the difference in our neuro-ness, for lack of a better term. So let's look at some implications, ideas, and resources. So as we have this conversation, we are talking about making space in the physical spaces we have, in our practices within those spaces, and we can also take ourselves further and think about how we interact with the world when we think about our programs where we welcome the community or where we go into our communities and work with people, and partnerships. That's a wonderful resource for us, and we will talk about that. So something personally I approached my congregation with was having a TV. It is in our nursery space. So that way my son is able to play, make the noise, run around that he needs to be himself and to be regulated. I am able to still be with the church community. And there are probably others, adults in our communities, where if they could watch the service in a separate space, but still be physically in our buildings and with other people, but in a way that speaks to their needs, would be excellent. And if there are other folks, again, like Spence was saying earlier, whatever we do to support and accommodate our neurodiverse folks, that is going to pay dividends for the entire life of the church.
When our kids were young, they didn't want to be separated, but also weren't interested in sitting quietly in the pew. And so congregations that had that, it was great. So you could go to the nursery and still feel like you knew what was happening. So for parents of young children, that was a great thing as well.
Mm-hmm. Sensory bags available for worship. There are a number of times where you can forget your resources or forget the resources for those you support, and you'll end up like myself, rubbing the carvings at the end of your pew because you didn't think, oh, I'll bring my comm strip keychain that has textured stickers on it that I can manipulate during the service as I work to focus on what is happening and not have a wandering mind. We've all been there during a sermon where you're thinking about, oh, I'm stopping at the grocery store on my way home. I can't forget this, that, or the other thing. And so sensory bags to help with that emotional and physical regulation would be incredible. There's many churches that have the large Ziploc bags at the door for children with coloring sheets, activities, markers, and whatnot. Why couldn't we have bags that had noise canceling headphones, some fidget spinners, and ask the people who are in our churches, what needs do you have, and how can we support them by having these bags for you to take to your pew, so that way you can worship in wonderful ways, and also figuring out, okay, there are these particular needs. How can we adapt pieces of worship to suit the whole community? We often have signs on our doors. This is the parlor, this is the nursery, this is the fellowship or friendship hall. If we used images so that way those who can't read or are our younger neurodiverse friends or our friends who do not communicate verbally, there is a system called PECS, and it's a bunch of pictures, and those are also used on the high-tech AAC, the communication devices. And so if we had those pictures next to the names, so that way people could point and to say, oh, we're going to, we're going to the parlor, or I want to go in the parlor, or, oh, let's go in the sanctuary. Having more visuals is incredibly helpful for folks who may have a social communication delay, so they can't make conversation. They have a lot of language. That is often one of the comorbidities with autism, for example. And offering people another way to request and make their needs known.
And just in general, so many public spaces, signage is horrible. Where, you go like just after the federal election, sometimes you're in a building you've never been in before, and there is little signage, or some of our churches are labyrinthian. And for someone to know where to find the bathroom or the fellowship hall that was mentioned at the end of the service, yeah, the more signs, the better, is my experience.
Mm-hmm. Worship can be loud, whether it is music or speaking or a dramatic presentation or whatever the style and way of our worship service is. Building in some quiet, perhaps we're offering people a chance just to breathe before we enter into prayer, or in the midst of the sermon, perhaps the minister, the leader, has asked a bunch of rhetorical questions, offering people a space to actually think about the points for reflection would be incredibly helpful, and varying the level of our sound. All of our communally sung hymns or worship songs or whatever it is, they don't all need to be at full volume. God is not hard of hearing. So if we take some time, and if we're singing something more reflective that might be a bit repetitive, we can take that volume down a bit. There's something really powerful about being with others, and everyone needs to lean in a little bit to hear a little more. Now, I do know that we have people who have hearing needs in our communities as well. So finding a balance and finding a way forward with those that you facilitate with obviously needs to happen in so many ways.
Yeah, a lot of churches that I was part of, they stopped asking rhetorical questions in sermons, because for me, there are no rhetorical questions, and it's rude not to answer someone if they ask a question.
I'll stop asking you questions, Spencer, because that's dangerous. And partnerships are so incredibly important. So if we think about the our autistic siblings in Christ, throughout Ontario, I must admit, I do not know for the rest of the country, but I hope this is the case, that there are autism hubs and regional organizations that you can connect with to do the best that you hope and pray that you can do for our neurodivergent folks that are autistic. So I'm in the Hamilton area, and here there is the Ron Joyce Children's Health Center, and it is a regional hub with programming and workshops and developmental pediatricians and all sorts of wonderful services. And there's also Autism Ontario, which is a nonprofit that offers all sorts of programming and training as well. And Autism Ontario likes to partner with existing groups or movie theaters or pools or recreation departments to provide opportunities for autistic folk to be in the community, developing relationships, socializing, and becoming familiar with the world and the neighborhood that they live in. So wouldn't it be wonderful if we had facilities that we could partner with Autism Ontario or another group that supports neurodivergent folks, and we have this gym. Let's have an open gym session. Let's there's 8 million other ideas we could think of. We have a number of our churches have wonderful outdoor spaces. How can they be used as well? Because often they sit there and wait for whoever to cut them, or whatever the case may be. And another way of using our buildings is sensory rooms, Snoozlin multi-sensory environments. They have a wonderful website that's linked here, and there's a resource page where we'll email out to you afterwards. It will help equip and inspire the creation of sensory rooms. I believe it's on the next slide. It mentions St. Paul's Anglican Church in Port Dover. They have invested in a Snoozlin multi-sensory room. They are quite expensive to put together, but a simple sensory room can be facilitated and supplied in wonderful ways using items that may be found around your house, but also some of these other wonderful pieces. And so St. Paul's in Port Dover have said, if you live in Norfolk County, you can book time in our Snoozlin room and come and use it, spend time. Snoozlin rooms often have low lighting, and perhaps we'll have a projector with a galaxy scene, or they will have bubble lamps with lights or LED curtain lights. Here we go. There's a couple of those right there. And so a support person can be with them, and the neurodivergent can regulate and their sensory needs, whether it is they don't want bright lights, so being in this dimmer space will, serve them well, or they really love the particular elements that are in the room. Maybe there's a crash pad that they can jump onto many times over. The congregation I'm a part of recently put in a grant proposal to change our nursery into more of a playroom that will still serve nursing parents and diaper changes, but also will offer space for neurodivergent folks to come and take a moment and use the elements we will have in the room, and it will have many sensory pieces to it. And there are some grants we have, and they're noted on the next slide, but we won't go there quite yet, that other churches have applied and created sensory spaces or worked with our neurodiverse communities. And so we've mostly been talking about how are we serving the neurodiverse folk that are in our churches, but we also need to consider the neurodiverse folks like Spencer and myself who serve and work or volunteer in our churches. How are we accommodating a particular sensory need, or like myself, working a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday is really, really hard. So I'm gifted with a flexible schedule. So I can support my neurodivergent son and also support myself. So if I have a thought for our next youth event and it comes at 9 o'clock at night, I don't feel like I can't spend an hour or whatever it is working through that. So that flexible schedule is beautiful, because also neurodivergent folks and ADHD that I experience, burnout is really real and can come on quicker than one can really realize. And so building in safeguards and safety nets to catch people when they find themselves in those places, and how can we support them so well, and always presuming that competence and that people have the capabilities to do the work that they are called to do. And just because something might be a struggle for someone, it doesn't mean that they can't. It just doesn't mean that they can't. And finding ways and partnerships between members that are together, or if it's the minister of a congregation, how can we support them? Are there others that are ministerial in the community they can be a part of to help support them? And in everyone that serves the church, whether it's through just attending on a Sunday morning, what are the gifts and how do we affirm them, and how do we help people grow in their gifts, just as we do when we have a youth group, when we talk about a spiritual gifts inventory or whatever it is. Just figuring out how to best support so then people can thrive and serve God in beautiful ways. And there's a number of Canadian online stores that you can buy different supplies for a sensory room, or you can get a weighted lizard that can sit on someone's lap as they're working or go around their shoulders because they have a sensory need for proprioceptive input and deep pressure. It is amazing what is available. And so I commend these to you as you think about how we can equip people as they worship and as they serve in our churches. And instead of thinking, oh, I wish we'd had whatever, having a few things on hand, thinking about the different sensory needs, the different sensory avoidances folks may have, thinking about just being ready, because we want to have this beautiful, abundant, radical welcome for everybody. And when we say all are welcome, are we ready to welcome all? And are we welcoming well? So
I'm really interested. I never heard of lizard service animal before.
yes, I'm not sure. Well, if you had a really big one, I'm sure that would do well with the weight. But if you just had a little salamander, it probably wouldn't give the deep pressure you were desiring. And you can tell we're ADHD because we spring in with things like that. And so these are grants where if you were really looking to try something new, to experiment and make some wonderful space, these are a couple of the grants that you can look into. And Jennifer Astock is actually here right now, and she is someone that you can ask questions of. Her email's on presbyterian.ca and is a great resource. And we have 10 minutes. So we are wondering if you have further questions, or are there things your church is trying, or things you've heard of, or whatever it is, neurodiversity. We'd love to chat. So go ahead and put them in the chat, raise your hand, unmute. Jennifer.
Hi. So as you were, well, first of all, lovely to see all your faces. Many of my favorite people in the denomination are on this call right now, so that's lovely. As you were talking, both of you, thanks Jess and Spence, I was thinking about the various needs within my own congregation. As Jess knows, I have a Sunday school that's very small, but with a large percentage of neurodiversity. And then a predominantly senior congregation who are dealing with limitations of various kinds, including dementia, which I know is not part of that category, except that it certainly is a change in neurology, right? And I was starting to think about, I may think that I understand some of it. I may have teachers and a session that seem to understand a bit of celebrating and welcoming well, as you said, but I have a congregation who struggles to understand that, right? Like I have a congregation that grumbles every time one of the autistic boys comes up to the pulpit to read the call to worship, right? So I started to think, okay, how can we combat some of that resistance to welcoming well? And I started to think about what if we had a service that celebrates that diversity? And I started to think Trinity Sunday, which, you know, it's after Pentecost, that would be a really good Sunday to do because it celebrates the diversity of God. And I also then extended it because I also have a fairly culturally diverse congregation. So we're celebrating all of our diversity, our cultural, our gender, our neurodiversity. And so I thought this is a way where I can help. I think I could help inform the congregation as a whole, while very openly celebrating the diversity within the congregation.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It was inspired by your words, both of you.
We try. Yeah, that teaching piece is really important for us as we try something new. Every time our church has named a type of diversity or whatever it is, it's always tricky. And so the way Spencer beautifully framed our time together with the body of Christ passage, and I love that, you know, God as three persons and the diversity within God and how they interact with one another is so much like our communities and the diversity within it. And yeah, it is the reactions, because it's again a change in the world and how the world is today. And we have many folks who are mourning what the church looked like, how it operated, its practices, the traditions, and making this space.
And I think what Jen said about the education piece is, I don't think anybody wants to be judgmental or unkind. I've always thought I was a compassionate person, but until my daughter and I were diagnosed with ADHD, I didn't really understand it or believe it. I just thought those are kids or people who have too much sugar and they just can't like get their act together and just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And if their parents had just been firmer, they wouldn't, you know, have these issues. And it was only after like learning about my own brain that, you know, that really changed things for me. And like I said, I didn't think I was, you know, a harsh or judgmental person, but I certainly had I didn't understand things properly, and so now it changes my perspective on all these situations. So,
Shona mentioned in the chat the Uniquely Human podcast and that they have an excellent episode on faith communities and being inclusive. So I'm going to find that and we will add it to our resource page we will send out afterwards.
Any other things congregations are trying or things that have worked well?
Um, um, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Um, my congregation has a neurodivergent adult who attends occasionally. He's 35, but he has the cognition of a 4-year-old. He comes with an aid worker, and as soon as they walk in the door of the church, the aid worker abdicates all of their responsibility for care of this individual and just assumes that the congregation is going to look after him. His needs are a little bit overwhelming for most members of the congregation, and he tends to want to glue himself to the minister um, the minute he walks in. So the aid worker is needed. We have tried stressing that to the aid worker, that the aid worker needs to stay with him, and their response is to stop bringing them. So, what other ways could we be dealing with this? Is there anything we're missing, like that we're not thinking of that we could be?
No, that is like what an awkward situation for
It really
everybody.
is. It really is because we enjoy having him participate in worship. But while the minister's busy doing the service, the minister can't supervise him.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and the support workers there to support this individual. So if the yeah, and our churches, we know we hate difficult conversations and any sort of conflict. We try to avoid it, but in this individual's best interest, I think another conversation with the support worker about we need you to help us support him. And if they could, if that support worker could teach you, when this particular behavior is happening, or, oh, here's a strategy to help support them. Creating a partnership between you and the support worker and really making it clear with the support person that it is really difficult for our minister to lead worship for the whole community when this particular behavior happens or whatever it is. It's not easy by any means, but I think it's valuable to have the conversation with the intention to create a partnership and a learning opportunity for both of you.
Right. And I completely agree with that. But I do think that there are times when, and certainly in this particular situation, where he has uh, uh, changing support staff. It seems like every time he's here.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So that
that
sounds like,
it's
sorry, I'm
it
interrupting you. That's a byproduct of my ADHD.
Mhm.
Um, but it's so if it's a different person, often it's likely these support people are coming from a particular organization. So if you knew what that organization was, perhaps speaking with them, are these support workers even comfortable being in the church with the individual and trying to sort out a way forward?
Well, and that's the biggest part of it is most of the support workers will not come in with him because they don't want to come into a church.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think the organization is showing a lack of sensitivity to his needs, in not helping to ensure that he can get to church. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what all, other than communicating with them, what we can do as a congregation. And I suppose I bring this up just to point out that not every situation is resolvable,
Mm-hmm.
and there's only a certain amount of guilt we can internalize for the fact that not every situation is resolvable.
Mm-hmm.
Because often the responsibility lies outside of our control.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Indeed. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, before you go, I think Heather has her hand up.
Mm-hmm.
Unmute and go ahead.
Hi, guys. It's good to see you.
You too.
I just wanted to speak about a couple of experiences I've had. The congregation that I served before moving up here to Bracebridge, we were located across the street from an elementary school. So it meant that our congregation was made up of a lot of families with young children, which was lovely. And it also meant that we had quite a few children with neurodivergent needs. I'm the mom of an adult son with autism. And so that was, you know, just part of our world to begin with as well. And so I'm glad you put up the links there for the different grants and the funds available. So the church that I serve, it was called is called Living Faith. And we were able to get some grant money, and we created a sensory room sort of based on that snoozlin idea. And we you know, put in special lighting, so you know, that classic overhead lighting with the buzz and all that is just not conducive to anybody's health, especially someone on the spectrum. So we were able to get special lighting, you know, all of those sensory wall, and we had a chair that spun, and a good chunk of the funding we also used to hire a very part-time worker. So that person was like an employee of the congregation who had special training in caring for those with neurodivergent needs. And she would come on Sunday mornings to stay in the sensory room for whoever needed it. But we also ran a weekly after school club, and she would be, that part of her job description was being there on the Thursday as well for after school club. Another thing we did, so my doctoral thesis was based on sharing stories of faith for elementary school age children on the autism spectrum disorder. And in my research, I discovered that I really researched a lot of the communication needs for those with ASD. And as you know, eye contact, that type of thing is really challenging. So it turned out from my research that children responded better to cartoons or, you know, illustrations than real life, like photos or real life representation. So a lot of our, we used a lot of projection in that during the services. A lot of that we did in cartoon form for the children's time instead of having photos or whatever. And then in our bulletins, we put icons. So when it was time to pray, and then we found this was really helpful for others in the congregation who may have learning disabilities. Jen, you mentioned dementias, like various Alzheimer's and whatnot. When reading is a bit more of a challenge. So we would have like an icon of praying hands before prayers of the people or whatever. Excuse me, we would have like musical notes before the hymn. So it just gave like a visual cue to those not just with neurodivergent needs, but others in the congregation. Oh, this is okay, where we're going to sing. And then there was a, you know, another little icon for when we're going to stand and when we're going to sit and whatnot. And I know, Jen, you also mentioned about the dementia. When I was doing my research, I found that an awful lot of the communicative needs for those on the autism spectrum also sort of replicated itself for those with dementia. And so I think if whatever we can do to just sort of, so much of what we do, if you analyze what we do on a Sunday morning, so much of it is written or auditory, hearing. And if you're on the spectrum, like you've just tuned right out. So if we can add visuals and we can add different auditory, like you were saying, a lot of different quiet and maybe incorporating music for a time of meditation or something, but also even silence and being mindful of just, I think, just being aware of the sensory needs and the social needs. If somebody's not going to look you in the eye, don't take that as something offensive or say, look me in the eye, son. They can't. I used to teach my son to look at somebody's earlobe, and then it sort of looks like you're sort of looking in the eye, but he could handle that. The earlobe, fine. The eye, forget it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Wow.
It is wonderful to hear what's already happening in congregations and the work that's already happening. And I would love to read your dissertation. I don't usually say that to people, but that one sounds wonderful.
Pretty
And
boring, actually, but
well, it's an academic paper, so I have reasonable expectations, but hearing about the young man who I was witness to leading the call to worship at Jen's church, giving people the opportunity to use their voice and lead in worship. Like, think of someone with their AAC device. Say they have an iPad with a program on it. And if they read scripture, if they had it prepared beforehand in a saved button, and they were able to go up if that was something that they were capable of, and they, like, I'm gonna start crying thinking about it. But wouldn't that be incredible to open up that space for someone to use the voice they have? There's just, the possibilities are wonderful and endless. And with just a little bit of intention, we can really do so much for folks. We are so grateful that you were here today. We don't have our email addresses on here, but if you look at the staff directory at presbyterian.ca, you can find Spencer and I quite close on the alphabetical staff listing. And if there are things you think we may have missed afterwards, an evaluation will be sent to you. Be honest. If there are things you'd like to hear more about, if there's resources you think that would be helpful for our denomination, please note those down. Spencer and I are really excited about the work we get to do and that God has called us, and resourcing and supporting the wonderful ministries that are already happening, and being able to highlight some body parts that maybe we're not using or paying much attention to, and offering them care and support. Let's do that together. So thanks again for coming. And thanks to Spencer, who's only come into his role in the national offices this month. And he did a lot, this PowerPoint, and very grateful to him for his efforts on this webinar. And we hope that we were all right, and that you didn't Google Allie, who was originally going to be with us, and are disappointed. So, but if you are, put it on your evaluation and we won't take it personally. I'm going to pray as we go our separate ways today. God, you are so many things. We meet you in Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer, and your humanity, your creation is many things as well. It is neurotypical, it is neurodiverse, it is many races, it is many religions, it is many faiths, it is many all the things. And help all of us in all the ways that we are, and all the people that we love and that we serve are, that we remember that when they were knit together, that when they entered this world, that you said that they were good. and help us to honor the goodness in them and to help them live into the fullness of the life you intend. Be with us as we return to our ministries or our day jobs or our retirement or some good relaxing. We appreciate this time with you and the lives we share. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.